Claire Curran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to acknowledge what my colleague Megan Wood said about the importance of a modern patent regime which allows for the fundamental underpinning of our intellectual property system and to enable the commercialisation of our inventions and our ideas for the benefit of New Zealand's economy. That is fundamentally important. And there will be much discussion on the SOP, which has been proposed by the Green Party member Stephen Browning, for which Labour will not be supporting, but there will be room for more discussion on that later on as we get through the parts of this bill. I also want to acknowledge what the Minister has said when he took a call on this part of the bill and the work that has been undertaken to get to the point that we are now. And I will elaborate on that in a minute. But I do want to finish the story of how this bill came to be back in this House after 3.5 years after coming back from the Select Committee, when the original wording and with regards to the exclusion, one of the key exclusions in this bill, which is for software to be patentable, and why that was so important and what happened after it got back to the House. So, Mr. Chair, when it came back, there was that clear, simple exclusion. There was concerns because it sat on the order paper for such a long time. There was questions to the Minister at the time, Simon Power, about whether there was still a commitment to the undertaking, to the intent of the Select Committee. Those commitments were given. But unbeknown to us on this side of the House, the pressure certainly had come on, and had come on from those who hadn't submitted at the Select Committee and who represented essentially the multinational software corporations, notably Microsoft and IBM. And also, I have to acknowledge some of New Zealand's big companies, Fisher and Paykel, who did remain concerned about the lack of definition in the bill of embedded software. And so, as we feared, in August 2012, the current minister now, Mr. Foss, who was trying to deal with the situation and ultimately we would contend at that point made things worse, amended the bill to include, as my Green colleague Gareth Hughes said, that controversial as such language. And while the Minister said, and has said in the House today, that his purpose was simply to clarify the intention to exclude software patents, that amendment proved hugely controversial. And our contention was that the multinationals had in effect won, and that they had got a clause that would suit their purposes rather than the local IT industry. And that industry mounted a concerted pushback on that unclear as such language, that amendment. An industry petition was launched which was backed by groups such as the New Zealand Institute of IT Professionals, Internet New Zealand, NZ Rise and the New Zealand Open Source Society. They set that up and it gained huge support almost immediately. That petition called on the government to remove the ambiguous as such language and replace it with a simpler clause that would clarify that underlying intention. And I adopted that petition's proposed alternate clause as a proposed amendment to counter the Minister's amendment at that time, and other MPs in this House got behind that and raised concerns about the lack of clarity in the bill. That was in September last year. It's now August, the end of August in 2013. It took between then, September last year and May this year, to the concerted efforts of many people and political pressure for there to be some very good work done on perhaps providing what is now an even better bill, and I say this in the House today, an even better bill than the one that came back to the House in 2010. So I do want to acknowledge that work. new clause, which is we're now seeing at the committee today, Mr. Chair.
Claire Curran.
Thank you. Ensures that we will not, it's very carefully worded, it has wide support, it ensures we will not go down the European Union path by effectively hard coding those parts of that UK Aerotel test which I mentioned earlier, and it means even if the UK approach to patent law does drift towards a more liberal regime to allow more software patents, that New Zealand will not. And that, I think, is something that we all in this House today can be hugely proud of. And I want to recognise the hundreds and hundreds of New Zealand software developers and innovators who worked tirelessly and patiently to explain their industry to us members of Parliament, to explain that how innovation in code occurs and how it can be stifled by the might of a multinational who claims the right to a piece of code, a mathematical, which is in effect a mathematical algorithm, like a phrase in a book or a piece of music, a series of notes in a piece of music that cannot be locked up in a metaphorical box, for if they are, we all lose out. So I want to actually acknowledge some people individually. I want to acknowledge Paul Matthews from the New Zealand Institute of IT Professionals, Don Christie and Daniel Spector from NZ Rise, which represents New Zealand IT companies to promote Kiwi innovation. I also want to acknowledge Guy Burgess and Dave Lane, experts in this field. I want to acknowledge the Greens for sticking to their guns, for New Zealand First for taking the time to listen and understand, and also the Māori Party and Mana for backing Kiwi innovation. And I actually want to acknowledge Peter Dunn, who on many matters we do not agree, but on this particular matter he did the right thing, and it was his vote that actually mattered. Finally, I do want to acknowledge the work that the Minister has done, because he knuckled down with the officials, he listened, and he knuckled down with the officials and the industry, and he worked out a compromise that could see us with one of the best pieces of law in this area of intellectual property in the world.
Ian Lees-Galloway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's not long to go until the lunch break, so I only intend to take a brief call on the part one of